do not just think that this is going to qualify as a force majeure and it's going to get you out of a contract. Be very, very careful to fulfill your contractual obligations. If you have questions, seek competent legal advice.
All right. How the coronavirus is impacting the real estate industry. I'm here with real estate and construction expert Michael Kelley from Shutts Bowen.
Yep.
Thank you for coming in today.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So you watch the news and it's all bad, but our agents have never been busier. You're saying that contractors are busy.
Yep.
But we do have to plan for the worst. And today we're going to talk about some of those risks and a lot of the questions, the obvious questions that we're hearing. And so, Mike, start off. What's your assessment of what's going on right now?
Clearly a fluid situation. I mean, I just got a text that says that Florida cases are up to 155. So as far as the impact in Florida, we're still in the infancy as to whether this is going to be a major
So anything
impact.
could happen.
We have no idea, right? And so we've seen what's going on in the global economy, and I think a lot of folks are looking at the global impact. The impact of the stock market's huge.
Oh,
It's huge. Now, whether that persists or whether that's a short-term thing, I don't think people really know. I know that there's a lot of prognosis about the impact this is going to have for a long time. I think it may still be too early to tell. But to your point, Mark, the business that's going on right now, as you said, in residential construction and in sales, it's
people want to transact.
It's never been busier.
Inventory's low, rates are low. It seems like a healthy market, but this big elephant in the room, I think, is causing them to slow down and stop
a little bit. So yeah, people are saying, okay, what do we do? All right, what do I got to do? And I was researching the topic, this morning. You and I have been talking about it all weekend. And I think I saw late last week somebody on YouTube posted a video of how to use coronavirus to break your contract, how to get out of your contract. And I was like, I don't know if that's the best advice.
Not good thinking.
I don't know if it's accurate. And I think you need to be very careful because running to just the idea that this is some pandemic is going to be an excuse for me to get out of a contract, I think you need to be safe about it. I think you need to take a look at what is really going on, the impact to your business, to your particular relationship and that agreement, and how you might be able to continue to perform under it. And so I think that the first thing from my point of view is look at the impact that coronavirus is having, not just globally, but let's look at locally. And
we haven't seen too much locally. I mean, everything's slowing down.
But we've seen the parks close. We've seen we see churches canceling services. So certainly that's unprecedented for us here. So we're seeing a social and communal reaction that is intended to flatten the curve. Everybody understands that, I think, now. Like, we're not overreacting. We're not calling this something bigger than it is in terms of the impact that it could have on individuals. But we're saying, hey, let's make sure we don't overtax the healthcare resources that we've got. Let's all be safe about it. And I think that's right. I think that's good advice. But then how does that affect business? We were talking to some builders earlier today where they've got subcontractors reaching out to them proactively saying, hey, we're still open for business.
Right.
We still want to come to work. And so I think that you still have quite a few people that are out, working. So
let's go back to the pressing question, the obvious question I heard this morning from some of our agents about the force majeure how that affects the contracts. Define what that is first.
So sure. So in almost every commercial contract and in some residential contracts, you're going to have, what happens if something we weren't planning for happens? What do we do then? And in a commercial contract, it's usually going to be called a force majeure clause. A force majeure means superior strength. It's an intervening act. It's an act of God, like an earthquake, a flood, a tsunami, or it's an act of people that we can predict has happened in the past or could happen, but we don't know, like a war or an act of terrorism or a labor strike. And so they're usually very specifically defined events in a force majeure clause that says, okay, if these things happen, we're not planning on them happening, but if they do, here's what we're going to do to
Does this
modify.
count as that?
And so that's the issue, right? Does a pandemic count as it? Does a coronavirus in particular, people getting sick with a disease, does that count as a force majeure, or is it the acts of governments closing things down? Or cities closing things down, is that a force majeure? And so you have to look at the language. It's very, very, very specific. So force majeure is not it's not a matter of common law. It wasn't judge created over eons. It is a provision in an agreement, and it's going to be strictly interpreted. So judges are going to look at exactly what did the parties believe could happen. that could impact their performance of this agreement, and did they address it? And so, did you address a pandemic? It depends.
Right.
You may not have. Or the pandemic may not actually be the actual cause of your inability to perform. It might not be the pandemic. It might be something else. And so you'll want to look at the language of the agreement very specifically, and you want to analyze it from there. So force majeure, it's usually actually, that's all I have to say about force majeure.
Well, so let's get into so we called these builders today. It was interesting. Force majeure didn't come up, but of all these builders, the inspections from the municipalities, that came up 2 or 3 times.
Right.
Getting them to show up. So just people working, going to work and getting paid and doing their job that will hold these construction sites up. That came up multiple times.
Well,
this morning.
the government aspect of that, or whether government forces inspectors are going to be showing up to work or required to stay home. We've been hearing, rumors of quarantines and all this, and we don't know exactly what's going to happen next. But you could definitely see governments deciding to tell people, okay, you're going to work from home for a while. Well, what does that mean on a construction project? You might not get an inspector showing up for a couple days, couple weeks. That's where you might see an impact to a construction schedule. It's not that people don't want to work; it's that they can't get things inspected and approved.
Do you feel like this is being addressed as it should? Do you feel like the government's doing enough? Do you feel like we're taking this serious? I mean,
I don't know. I don't have an opinion about that. I think that from my perspective, it seems like we are, but you won't know until a couple weeks, couple months from now, and it's a non-event. If it's a non-event, then yes, we did. Yeah, we did what we needed to do, and so I think it's tough to say right now.
The number of deaths from the previous illnesses that have spread through the country,
sure.
SARS, those types of things, it snaps back because eventually they'll find a cure, right?
Sure,
and so
right.
We're not even close to the number of deaths that we've already had from previous illnesses. But I think the scary thing is they don't know how many people have it that you don't know they have it yet.
That's right.
And so they want this incubation period just to see and play that out. And so interesting. It's kind of I call it an act of God that for a lot of us, this quarantine is happening over spring break. The kids are out of school, so they're not missing a lot of school.
If we're going to be required to quarantine, we don't know yet. Right. We're hearing that we might, but we don't know. And so if folks are required to stay at home, then they can't show up for work. Does that qualify as a force majeure? It might, but it may not. I don't know. I think that if a government is requiring people to stay in home, that's probably going to...
So earlier you said people have got to get out in front of this. What's your advice for helping people get out in front of this?
Right. So I think that folks need to be proactive right now, not reactive. Look at any contract that you have that's going to require some sort of action in the next 90 days. A financial payment, some material being delivered from overseas, something that's going to happen in the next 90 days. Look at every contract that you have and analyze whether or not that a force majeure event was even addressed. It may not have been. If it's not, you probably need to talk to an attorney if you think that this is going to impact your ability to honor your obligations. If you do have a force majeure provision in your contract, then you need to analyze whether this counts. And so you'll need to look at what is the actual cause of your inability to perform. If it's folks not showing up because they're required to stay at home, then the actual cause might be a government telling people to stay at home.
Right.
Well, that might be covered. But if the actual cause is, I got a bunch of people that are sick with the coronavirus, that may not be covered.
Right.
And because these provisions are strictly interpreted, you can't just assume that I have got a force majeure clause and so it's going to be generally applied. It won't be. A lot of folks want to call things force majeure that aren't. Or they want to say, well, this is definitely a force majeure, but in your given contract, maybe it wasn't addressed, and so it's not. Right. So you have to be very careful about what the specific language of your agreement says. If it's general beyond the party's control, this might not qualify as that, And so you need to be careful to look at that. If it is covered, then you'll want to look at immediately what's the relief provided and what are your obligations as the person claiming a force majeure. Do you have a notice obligation? Do you need to put the person on notice? Most of the time you're going to need to. And courts always strictly interpret that. So you may have an event that qualifies under your language as force majeure, keeping you from being able to perform. But if you don't go through the correct notice provisions, you could be out of luck.
This is why I'm so proud because, we have probably, 4 or 5 attorneys that we keep, kind of in our bullpen to answer questions for our agents and for our clients. And I know you help a lot. If somebody has a question, how would they contact you?
So I think thanks for giving me that opportunity. But I think really importantly, you need to look for attorneys, particularly construction attorneys that are always dealing with delay issues, contractual performance and delay, that have significant experience with insurance and with triggering a surety performance on like a performance bond. So those are very specific and nuanced issues, and not a lot of litigators practice in those specific areas. This is what we do. We handle for construction development, real estate development, finance, anything that's related to the development of real estate in Central Florida and throughout the state and really the nation. This is what we do. So I'm at Shutts. My last name is Kelley, Kelley.
We'll have it up on the screen there.
And so you can email me at mkelley@shutts.com.
So Mike, listen, this is one of those things where it's going to change rapidly. Will you come back and give us an update if you can?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention, there's a couple of interesting nuances that's going on right now. So if you're in a real estate investment space, if you're raising funds, you're a REITs, any of those kind of things where you're dealing with regulatory concerns and investors, make sure you stay on top of the disclosure requirements right now. We just saw that Toll Brothers, which is a large national home builder, made a SEC disclosure just last week. And there may be affirmative obligations on you to go ahead and make some disclosures. The next thing is if you're dealing with folks that you might think are going to be challenged by the coronavirus or something to do with it, you want to be very proactive in making sure that you're not at risk of it. It's we've been talking about what am I supposed to do?
Right.
But what if somebody else that owes me an obligation is being challenged by the coronavirus? How do I do? What do I do then? And then we've got a list of exactly the steps that you should follow to be very, very careful to protect yourself. So I think that for the most part, business should be status quo until we hear otherwise from But do not just think that this is going to qualify as a force majeure and it's going to get you out of a contract. Be very, very careful to fulfill your contractual obligations. If you have questions, seek competent legal advice.
All right, Michael Kelley with Shutts Bowen. Again, thanks for watching, and we'll try and update you as often as we can. Thanks for watching.
All right, thanks everyone.